Number 5. The Pearls of Death. We know the Warrens. If that name doesn't sound familiar, check out some of the other vids and who they were on this channel. They were a pretty spooky duo. They've seen some nightmarish stuff in their time, and still have some proof of the evil that they vanquished. Their son-in-law still runs the official occult museum website and museum out of Monroe, Connecticut. Now, if you've seen Annabelle Comes Home, this first item on the list should ring a bell. The character Daniela in the movie tries to communicate to a loved one beyond the grave. Never a good idea. Unless you're with the Long Island medium, you know? Stick with the professionals. In order to do that, however, she puts on the museum's mourning bracelet. Yeah, that's not really a good idea there, Daniela. Now, there isn't really a mourning bracelet in the real occult museum, but there is such a thing as the Pearls of Death. And as of now, the Pearls of Death still have yet to appear in the Conjuring franchise. But they're notoriously one of the most dangerous items in the Warrens Museum, says their son-in-law, and very, very real. Beautiful accessory, I should add, but a very haunted and spirited set of pearls. They were added to the museum after a woman claimed that they were constantly strangling her. The Pearls of Death are said to strangle those who wear them. Now, I know what you're thinking. Get a bigger size, right? Well, it wasn't the wrong fit, per se, but like, choked aggressively. The story goes, the second that this poor woman put on these pearls, she literally needed people around her to even yank the pearls from its death grip around her neck. Yo, that is terrifying. Sometimes when I sleep with my chain on, I feel like I'm in a triangle choke in the UFC. But thankfully for us, the curls currently rest on the Warren shelves, where they'll hopefully stay for the foreseeable future. Tony Spera, the son-in-law of the Warrens and current owner-operator, says, it all goes way back with the cursed objects. Objects that someone put a curse onto. It could be a bracelet, a necklace, or any article that someone performed incantations and rituals over to put bad energy into, as someone or something famously did to the Annabelle doll. I feel like just talking about her, she's gonna show up. In the same way a priest can bless a holy relic, a satanic worshiper or black magic practitioner can curse a belonging, as seen with the Pearls of Death. Number 4, the werewolf paw. As always, if you dig what we do here on Top 5 Scary, hit that like button or feel free to leave us a comment down below. Let us know which James Wan Warren story is your favorite. I mean, nothing beats the David's exorcism scene in The Conjuring 3. Yeah, spoiler alert, it's uncomfortable to watch. Some of you will get it. Scariest thing I've ever seen in my life, I swear to God. However, in Annabelle Comes Home, we see another terrifying object just chilling on the shelf. A werewolf claw. Later in the movie, we even see a real werewolf demon thing outside the Warrens' house. And of course, according to Tony Spera, the werewolf paw is a nod to the real 1980s werewolf case that took the Warrens all the way to London, England. A true story of demonic possession, and not just normal demonic possession. That's a weird sentence to say out loud. But we know about this case. Apparently, they watched a television program, Sightings, and police officers and locals got interviewed about their encounters with a real local werewolf, the infamous Bill Ramsey. They said his abilities to take on men twice his size with ease as he would rampage through the city, blacking out. Lorraine felt a connection to him, and after traveling to London, she found Bill. According to Lorraine, he was possessed by an evil wolf spirit and needed a full-blown exorcism. The exorcism was a success on American soil, and Bill was able to return home, ready to start the rest of his non-lycanthropic days. He wouldn't grow hair or change at a full moon, but he used his fingers like claws, attacked people, and even would run around on all fours. Could this wolf paw in the museum be responsible for the werewolf case in London? I think it might.
Number 3, the satanic idol and the human skull. No way. No way a satanic idol and a human skull are haunted. No way. The skull was given to the Warrens, apparently as a gift, and I sincerely hope they kept the gift receipts for that one, because it's not the kind of thing I'd like, but they probably loved it. Now, the satanic idol is a slightly different story. The tall, slender, bizarre idol doesn't immediately scream Satan or satanic, but all you need to do is take a single look at it to be unnerved. It's definitely not the kind of thing you'd ever want to be face to face with, or I don't know, see in a scary clearing in the woods. And yet for one lonesome hunter, that's exactly what happened. Apparently, the idol and the skull with it were taken from the woods nearby the Warren estate by a local hunter who had found them both. The hunter claims that he was approached by a man in mysterious black garb who ushered him away. Obviously, a little shaken and stirred by such a bizarre experience, went to the only people he thought he could trust with something like this, and he took the idol to the Warrens for safekeeping. Now, after he brought it to them, Lorraine Warren fell deeply ill almost immediately after bringing the idol into their home. with no one able to correctly diagnose what was happening to her. Ed believed that his family was being targeted for welcoming the idol into their home. You'd think that a pair of story demonologists like this would have seen this coming, but you know, we all make mistakes. Lorraine recovered, obviously, and although no details emerged on how she did or what they did to purify and cleanse the idol, we can assume most likely it was probably blessed, exorcised, and doused in holy water of some kind. Otherwise, it wouldn't be fit to sit amongst their treasures. It now rests inside the museum, alongside all their other haunted relics, patiently waiting for Hollywood, where I've heard it's very open to hearing offers for a 3-picture deal and some spin-offs if that's on the table. Number 2, the organ. Now, one of the more mysterious items inside the museum is this big grand organ. Get your mind out of the gutter. It's a musical instrument, like a church organ. The church organ was recovered after authorities seized a haunted house in Connecticut. Having close ties to the Warrens, the authorities asked if there was anything they might like to retrieve from the site. The house burned down mysteriously, not even days after the organ was removed. Ed Warren, lover of all things haunted and a good bargain, had a great interest in this organ, and keeping of his self-imposed duty of controlling haunted objects, took it upon himself to take it home. Obviously this thing was cursed, obviously. Ed Warren would say that he would hear songs being played from it discordantly throughout his home whenever no one was around. And when Ed would venture forth into his office to investigate it, the music would stop as soon as he opened the door. He says this would occur every time he tried to investigate it, happening 3 different times. Eventually, losing sleep over one more haunted relic, Ed Warren contacted a friend at the clergy to come bless it. He would have a priest come by every 2 weeks or so to bless his home and to bless every item in the museum to keep the spirits docile. It begs the question, with this much effort, why even keep cursed items in your home? The organ at least seems benevolent, but Annabelle, the skulls, the satanic idols, why them? Well, Ed and Lorraine believed by keeping these items under supervision, it meant they were safe from outside interference and no one else would be put at risk. The pair feared that if any of the cursed objects were destroyed or damaged, then they could release the spirits back into the world, free to cause more mayhem. This same reason is why, despite the passing of the Warrens, the museum is still kept up and open and maintained. And also so, paranormal ghouls and goblins like us can go check out all this spooky stuff and get some fantastic Instagram stories out of it. Number 1, the Conjuring mirror. Hey, wait a second, there wasn't a particularly notable mirror in The Conjuring, are you trying to fool me? It was a haunted music box. Well, you're totally right. It was a haunted music box. This is a different thing, unrelated to The Conjuring, but related to The Conjuring in the sense that it was owned by Ed and Lorraine. Give it enough time, this might be in one of the movies. Over the years, you've probably heard all sorts of superstitions regarding mirrors. I'm sure you've heard that breaking one is 7 years of bad luck. But there are some who say that mirrors can be used as portals to other worlds, and can be used as the stage for all manner of ritual. It's even been said this is how Nostradamus was able to peer so deep into the future. This desire caught the attention of one Stephen Zellner, a Connecticut native who wanted to try a little soothsaying of his own. He acquired the mirror and performed a ritual on the art of kleptomancy, dangling the mirror from a thread into a pool of water, where supposedly, if performed correctly, you'll be able to see visions in the reflections below. Well, as the story goes, for Zellner, it worked, and he saw brief glimpses of his future, but didn't see the spirits that had been kept inside the mirror which he invited into his home, wreaking all manner of havoc on him. Doors would slam shut, drawers would fly open, objects would be hurled across the room, the poltergeist classics. Knowing that he'd invited something dark that he couldn't handle into his home, he reached out to the church for an exorcism and was referred to Ed and Lorraine. The pair exorcised the spirits back into the mirror, sealing them back. Knowing that it wasn't safe to leave the mirror in the hands of Zellner, the two offered to take it off of his hands, protecting and controlling the evil inside, and adding it to their collection of delightful cursed relics where it now resides.
In 5th place, we have a cursed wallet. So this tale begins in October of 1972 when an officer at the United States Military Academy contacted the Warrens a day before they were scheduled to present a lecture to the cadets there, informing them that a curious security problem had arisen and, could they possibly help? Now obviously they said yes, or else we wouldn't be talking right now. So the next day at a little past 4 in the afternoon, they entered the gates of the academy and were escorted to the office of Major Donald Wilson. So the major went on to explain how an unaccountable unacceptable breach of security was occurring in the home of West Point's commanding general. Ed asked the major if he knew the nature of the problem, to which the man replied that there was a ghost in the general's quarters. So the Warrens were soon escorted to meet the general and his wife, where they were directed into a sitting room, where the general explained that, while nothing macabre had happened, a number of curious incidents had occurred without any kind of explanation. So, some background: in the basement of that building there is a private study that at the time was kept locked and secure, but no matter how many times the bunk in there was made up, it was always found ripped apart later. Upstairs, ghosts had been seen flitting about the house. Oh, and personal belongings and other important articles were regularly found missing. The man emphasized not stolen, but just missing temporarily. Later, all these stolen items would be found upstairs, neatly laid out on the dresser in the general's bedroom. So he asked Ed if this could be, caused by a ghost, and Ed confirmed that it was indeed a possibility, and probably like a human ghosty and not a demonic spirit. Lorraine offered to walk throughout the home to try and, establish where the spirit might be present, while Ed and Major Wilson headed for the basement with the key to the downstairs study. As usual, the bunk was torn apart as though someone had been sleeping in it. Well, nothing else was disturbed. So while Lorraine did her walk through the house, she picked up impressions of the powerful individuals who had spent time in the home in many, many years over the years, but hardly any sense of a mischievous spirit. She offered to enter a trance state later that evening, after the presentation, to attempt to contact the spirit, and the group, was like, alright, you do you, let's try this. So much later that night, after the events of the day, the group made its way upstairs to the MacArthur bedroom. All lights were turned off but one, and Lorraine closed her eyes. She described seeing a black man wearing a dark uniform with no markings, who was overtaken with a sense of fear, guilt, and lack of acceptance. He told her that he'd been accused of killing, and his cell was in the basement, but the army had exonerated him of that crime. He was very sorry, and could not hold his sorrow any longer. He told her that his name was Greer, and spelled it out clearly for Lorraine, and she was able to convince him to pass over into the light. So after she exited her trance, Lorraine gave a complete description of the man and said at the end that he had simply vanished, and mentioned that he had left his wallet in that downstairs bunker. So the general was adamant that based on the uniform Lorraine had described, no black men had served at West Point during that time. But, he mentioned he would look into it and thank the Warrens for their time. Goodbye, alright, sure. A few weeks later though, Ed and Lorraine received a phone call from the general. It was discovered that a black man, a porter by the name of, Greer, had served there. So he had been assigned to the Thayer mansion in the early 19th century, and he'd been accused of committing death, but the army did exonerate him of it. His records had been out of order, and he would now be officially filed as deceased. Also, the walls in the bunker had been renovated, and the wallet was finally found. What do you know? The army offered to mail it to the Warrens just to be safe, and it has stayed in their museum ever since. In fourth place, we have the Snedeker family rosary beads. And as you might expect, this true story begins in the witching hour, in the wee small hours of the morning. Because if rosary beads aren't scary enough. One night, very late at night, Ed and Lorraine were contacted by this family who had just moved into a house on Meriden Avenue in Southington. Specifically, the mother of the family unit and a niece who came to stay with the family were on the phone. And, so originally what they found and bought was a big and seemingly welcoming home. But what they didn't know when they bought it was that it was a former funeral home. Oh, and fun fact, the morticians at the funeral home were allegedly involved in necrophilia, or performing sex acts with corpses. And what used to be the showroom for the coffins was now where the younglings were. And just down the hall from that was the place where the bodies were prepared for viewing. Yeah, not grim at all. So the boys were the first to start talking about things they had seen and experienced, saying they were absolutely terrified, and the parents, chastised them at first for it, but the boys were so scared they started sleeping on the floor in the living room. Among the sounds they would hear were the sound of chains pulling the coffins upstairs, and there were no more coffins in the house. So the woman who called the Warrens were terrified, with the niece in a small bedroom in the back of the house, and the covers on her bed were levitating around her like there was a fan blowing them around. Lorraine said while the mother was on the phone with her, even more bizarre events started happening. So remember those rosary beads? Yeah, she had them in her hand, and while she was speaking, the beads were actually being pulled apart and falling to the floor. Lorraine and Ed went over the next morning with the family's parish priest, and a blessing the house seemed to do absolutely nothing to calm things down. And that's when the Warrens decided to call the bishop's office. So the church eventually sent an exorcist, which seemed to sort of do the trick, but not before one last hurrah from whatever the heck was believed to be haunting the house, because demons don't like to give up without a fight. There was this huge tree in front of the house, and half the tree, with no wind, broke off and fell on the property. The family moved the heck out of Dodge a short time later, and Ed and Lorraine kept the rosary beads that had been pulled apart, because if a demonic spirit can touch a Catholic relic, that means it's been infested with something absolutely awful, and they didn't want to risk the beads spreading throughout the world and causing even more damage. Yeah, that makes sense.
Number 3. The Cursed Brick. Perhaps one of the least terrifying items on this list is a brick from the Borley Rectory. aka a brick from one of the most haunted houses in all of England. The house was originally built back in 1862. It was a house built for the rector of Borley, but after a fire in 1939, it was never rebuilt. It was finally demolished after in 1944, but before its final days, Harry Price, a paranormal researcher at the time, reported numerous ghostly sightings, including a ghost nun, a ghost car passing by, as well as numerous horse and buggy sounds on the property. That's terrifying. Yep. A little piece of the haunted home sits in the Warren Occult Museum today, as they were able to visit the Borley Rectory before it was demolished. According to local folklore, a nun fell in love with a monk from the monastery and the pair attempted to elope together. They were found and sentenced to death. The monk was reported to have been sent to the gallows in the monastery, whilst the nun was sealed into the walls of the nunnery alive. Ouch. This nun is believed to be the one that is seen on the grounds of the Borley Rectory, endlessly looking for the monk that she once loved. That's kind of cute. That's kind of nice. The nun has been seen and heard many times over the years, and the first reports came from 1928 when the owner Guy Eric Smith and his wife contacted a newspaper to report a strange happenings. The newspaper took on the help of an investigator, Mr. Harry Price. Mr. Price stayed at the house to research for more than a year. While staying there, Price witnessed a ton of poltergeist phenomena. Even said that he got in touch with the spirit of a past tenant, Reverend Harry Bull, who died in the house. After numerous attempts at exorcising the property, in 1930, Mr. and Mrs. Smith left the house for good. The next residents of the house were Reverend Foister and his wife Mary Ann. They both experienced the same phenomena that Price and the Smiths had witnessed before them. However, this time the poltergeist activity seemed to be a little bit more aggressive, with reports of smashed glasses, broken windows, and Mary Ann being even thrown from her bed in the middle of the night. In 1939, the house was burnt to the ground due to an oil lamp. It was then left to ruins until 1944 when it was demolished. The Borley Rectory was said to have been the most haunted building in all of the UK, so although just an unassuming brick, its origin story has seen quite a bit of life and death. Number 2. Black magic dolls. We already know some of the infamous museum dolls that are haunted by all hell, but we're not talking about Annabelle. There are apparently handfuls of other dolls that deserve some jarring honorable mentions. Tony Spera believes that there are dark powers that live amongst the various voodoo dolls and handmade figurines that are just casually splayed out for museum goers. Stuffed dolls like the Shadow Doll, of course, who looks like a night terror version of a twisted Muppets puppet. It's known for visiting dreamers and stopping their heart mid-nightmare with fear. Okay. It's a little excessive. So haunted, yeah. There's a satanic doll that looks like it would resemble a tall wooden man, possibly even the devil. Yeah, haunted beyond all hell. Found in the woods too, around satanic worship. Could you believe? And of course, this dark magic doll. They just look haunted, you know? That off-colorization look, the facelessness, and glass casing around it. Again, that can't be a good sign. Historically, if you do this, obtaining a doll or statue or carving, add in a little dash of dark magic and voodoo, and voila, you have a very dark, cursed item. There's also a doll with no mouth and no eyes. Yeah, that's not scary at all. I think we can all agree that there's like 20 origin films like right here with each and every one of these black magic figurines. Like, I understand Furbies a little bit more now, you know? Like, that's a cursed item right there. 100%. Furbies belong in the Warren Museum. I'm surprised there isn't some there already. And coming at the number 1 spot, the music box. And of course, we had to include one of the creepiest elements of the Conjuring movies, and I guess what makes any scary movie scary. It's the music. And boy, is there one haunted creepy Warren Museum object that comes to mind: the Perron family music box. Director James Wan wanted to use the actual music box in the first film because mirrors and creepy music make for the best thrillers, but also because that there is a real haunted artifact from the real case. Today, the box is safely stored in the Warren's museum alongside all of the other spooky items that we already covered. The music though, right? Like, this part in the movie actually scared the shit out of me. Like, the anticipation alone. They always do it so slow too, don't they? Dun 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 dun. But it's like real life though. That's horrifying. The music box apparently caused a lot of problems for these Perron girls, specifically April, the youngest of the Perron children. She found this antique in the house and she used to communicate to spirits. In the movie, this was a happy ending, but in real life, the Bathsheba Sherman curse was never really resolved. The original OG film, The Conjuring, was one of the best haunted house movies of the last decade that arguably spawned both a franchise and a new respect for old school horror. I wonder what's next for us in the James Wan universe, because that werewolf paw, yeah, that looks terrifying.
In 5th place, we have a satanic idol. This story began in 1991 when a deer hunter was walking through the woods in Connecticut, close to where Ed and Lorraine resided. The hunter got lost and after some time stumbled upon a raised, circular rock formation with the idol in question standing in the middle of it. It is believed that the formation was common with folks who practiced devil worship in the 70s. The hunter began to feel uncomfortable and left the area, deciding to make his way back to his car, and along the way he noticed an elderly gentleman walking alongside him who was dressed in head-to-toe black. The man in black never spoke a single word to the deer hunter. Now the hunter was getting more nervous by the second, and also more lost and unsure of his directional path. Desperate, he turned to the mysterious figure and simply asked, "How do I get out of here?" Luckily for our narrator, the man in black pointed in a direction and then disappeared. The hunter was so thrown off by that day that he reached out to Ed, who requested to be brought to the same area. Now the hunter wasn't 100% sure he could find the exact location, but was willing to try. Together, the two men were able to stumble through the forest, and without the aid of the man in black this time, found the rock fountain. Ed removed the demonic idol from the area and placed it in the museum, and that's when things got a little weirder. Approximately 3 days after removing the idol, Lorraine collapsed for no known reason, and she was transported to the hospital where no one could identify what was wrong with her. Thankfully, after 3 more days, she recovered. Now Ed believed that this was caused by the gentleman in black, who was believed to have been a high priest in a satanic cult, as a form of payback for removing the satanic idol. In 4th place, we have a conjuring book. So one night, after returning home from a night out with Ed, Lorraine was reviewing the calls left on the answering machine when she found one from a distraught woman who introduced herself as a Mrs. Sandy Foster, who nervously described a very distressing situation and begged the Warrens to return her call. So even though it was like 12:40 in the morning, Lorraine immediately tried to call her back, and while the phone rang continuously, the connection was broken. Lorraine tried a few more times, going so far as to contact the phone operator and the operator's supervisor, who ran tests on the phone line and frustratingly didn't find anything weird. The next day, when the Warrens returned home from church, Lorraine immediately phoned the Foster home again. This time, Mrs. Foster answered the phone on the second ring and mentioned that the phone had never rang the night before, and Lorraine made the decision to go pay the Fosters a visit that afternoon. She and Ed arrived at around 2 p.m. and met not only Mrs. Foster and her husband, but also their 3 offspring, Abby, Joel, and Hannah, who had experienced most of the phenomena. Ed arranged his recording gear on a nearby table while Lorraine asked her permission to walk the house, which she was immediately granted. Mrs. Foster brought up that her daughter Meg, the 3 offspring Abby, Joel, and Meg, who had experienced most of the phenomena. Ed arranged his recording gear on a nearby table while Lorraine asked her permission to walk the house, which she was immediately granted. Mrs. Foster brought up that her daughter Meg had always been interested in the occult and had purchased a book on conjuring as a gift for Meg, and based off of the description Ed gave of it, I believe it was a copy of the Ars Goetia. Now Meg admitted to attempting to summon a few of the spirits in the book, but had lost hope because nothing had happened. Ed prompted further, asking for specifics on the experiences that had happened in the last week when only the younglings were home. So, let's set the scene. The boys were already in bed, and Meg had just taken a shower. After going downstairs to make sure the doors were locked and, the lights were off, Meg returned upstairs to the sounds of running water, and the faucets had turned back on without any human's touch. Now downstairs, the lights and the radio had turned back on as well. Meg went downstairs and watched the radio dial moving on its own. After turning it off again, she got halfway up the stairs when she felt an icy cold hand touch her on the shoulder, just for a second in the dark. Now Meg bolted up the rest of the stairs, into her room, shut the door, turned off the lights, and hid under her covers. Outside the door, sounds of heavy footsteps caused her to suddenly shake under her covers. And then, more noises joined in with the mysterious steps. A door downstairs slammed shut, accompanied by furniture being pushed around and crashing, almost as if an angry person had broken into remodel. When Meg was able to open her eyes again, she saw a silver light come out of the woods and glide into her room. The next thing she knew, some hand yanked her hair 3 times. Each time it pulled harder, until the 3rd time it made her eyes water. Now, she ran into her brother's room for safety, and he confirmed that he was also terrified by hearing the assorted unknown noises, accompanied by loud whispering he could not make out. The duo eventually gathered enough courage to call their parents at the home they were at, but by the time the adults returned, all of the paranormal action had paused, and they were convinced the offspring were making it up. On the second occasion, everything that happened was almost the same as the first, but this time they involved the family dog, who was snarling at something that no one could see. Now, Joel remembered it as strange because the dog was deaf and could barely hear noise. So when the Wards were hiding in a bedroom on this occasion, instead of a silver figure, they saw a dark purplish cloud that they were unable to look at directly. So Lorraine at this point had returned and reported that she had experienced an inhuman presence throughout the home, and asked Meg if she possessed, black conjuring candles in her room. And when she responded yes, Ed told the family that he and Lorraine can handle everything, but they should maybe head out for a drive while it was happening, for safety. Ed and Lorraine got to work the moment the Fosters left, determined to discover the true nature of the spirit's presence in order to dispel it. For provocation purposes, Ed used used a crucifix and holy water, scattering the water at all 4 points of the cellar floor, and saying aloud, "In the name of Jesus Christ, I command all spirits, whether human or diabolical, to leave this dwelling and never return." On the first floor, Ed repeated the same procedure in each of the rooms. This process, known to any exorcist as binding, requires the infesting spirit to either show itself or move on. Having bound the cellar and all downstairs room without incident, the Warrens were ready to approach the second floor, where they knew difficulty was lurking. But as they prepared to act, a telepathically projected feeling of dread came over them, which is a distinct indication of an inhuman demonic presence. They pressed on and began climbing the staircase to the second floor. But as hard as they tried, neither Ed nor Lorraine could get any more than halfway up. Pushing against them was some impenetrable, unyielding force. So slowly, the Warrens backed down the stairs so as not to be knocked over backwards. And at the bottom of the stairs, for a brief second, diabolical laughter rang out. So, annoyed, Ed threw more holy water on the stairs, which caused the pressure to diminish enough to let them reach the top. They were able to bind almost all the rooms without incident, saving Meg's for last. Ed swung the door wide open, and he and Lorraine immediately felt the need to take a step back from the horrible sense of misery emanating from the room. With a steely composure, Ed walked into the room, cross in hand. Though no physical presence was there to be seen, the bedroom was freezing cold. One last time, Ed threw holy water in all 4 corners of the room, commanding, "Give us some sign of departure or an exorcism will be conducted here this very day." Almost instantly, the morbid sense of misery began to drain away, and the temperature in the room gradually returned to normal. So Meg's bedroom did contain those black conjuring candles, occult vestments, and books containing the rites for rituals of all sorts. Ed placed the items in the gal's trash basket, set them out in the hallway, and then sealed the room by reading a prescribed prayer of sanctification. He brought them back to his home for safekeeping, and that's one copy of the Ars Goetia I have no need to read. Thank you. See? I've told y'all, don't summon beings. In third place, we have a long black spike. So what appears to the innocent eye is like nothing but like a fence stake, perhaps left over from a construction project of sorts, actually holds a history of sadness and evildoing. Being the oldest item listed today, its history dates back to its use in like the 1700s. While the name of the witch it belonged to has been lost to time, the spike was originally used in a black mass ritual in an attempt to summon Satan himself to this world. The witch we're speaking of had attempted to curse the stake over the course of her pregnancy, hoping that it would become strong enough to take the soul of her womb in exchange for the devil. During the ritual, she plunged the stake into the flesh as sacrifice, but while it strengthened her relationship with Satan, it did not succeed in bringing him to Earth. The stake was passed down as a family heirloom, bringing a feeling of longing and sadness to any that held it until it was finally acquired by the Warrens. Knowing that the museum is technically closed, I worry if any vandals break in, the damage they could do with something that looks so unassuming, but it's so dangerous. In second place, we have the Carlson's knickknacks. So, this happily married couple in their 30s bought this old inn in New England. No big. So, Nathan Carlson traveled a lot during the week, but his wife, Alexandra, was home all the time to take care of their 2 daughters. Not long after moving in, Mrs. Carlson and her daughter began hearing footsteps on the second floor where, in the past, lodgers used to stay. During the afternoon and late into the night, they'd hear dragging, heavy-booted footsteps move across the floor above them. Mrs. Carlson's older sister, who lived nearby, occasionally stayed overnight in the house and also heard these footsteps. The Carlsons had rooms set aside elsewhere in the house for, live and farm help, and these men would hear the footsteps walking in circles around their bed. Sometimes, while Mrs. Carlson would be asleep at night, she'd be awakened by the spirits in the home, which would actually yank the covers off the bed while she was, in it. She later found out that very same thing happened to the farm help, which explained why the men tended to, quit so soon after they were hired. Eventually, the infestation phenomena upgraded into whisperings that could be heard behind closed doors. However, when Mrs. Carlson or her older sister checked the room where the whisperings were coming from, there was never anyone present. Although these spirits projected words that were often audible enough to be heard, the woman could never quite identify the language that was being used. And as time went on, the harassment continued. After the missus would straighten up the house, knickknacks and other little items would never be quite where she left them. Outside the house at night, lights would be seen in the attic, although there was no electricity up there. While painting a room one day, the heat was suddenly drawn away, and Mrs. Carlson felt a hand touch her shoulder. She said she became so angry that she threw the paintbrush in the direction where she believed the entity to be, and told it out loud, "I don't know who you are or what you want, but you're not gonna get me." Oh yeah, real smart. So this phenomenon went on almost daily, since this infestation had occurred in the house a long time ago. Exact date unknown. Both the kitchen and the bathroom water faucets would suddenly turn themselves on, full force at the same time. And on occasion, Mrs. Carlson would hear 3 knocks at the front door, which, that's a sign of an inhuman presence. But whenever she'd go to the door, there would be nobody there. On the second floor, a visitor reported seeing a snake on the window ledge after hearing 3 taps on the window, yet there was no nearby tree the reptile could have climbed. Ew, snakes, nope. Oh, it gets worse. While living in the house, the Carlsons had another spawn. And one night, while the missus was watching television in the living room, she suddenly heard a tremendous, powerful explosion. When she jumped up to check, thinking, the furnace had kaboomed, she found the door to the infant's room violently torn open. Objects were still swinging and vibrating, and the temperature in the nursery was equal to a meat locker. Although the spirits in the home had evidently tried to kill the youngling, the little one managed to live through the experience. Thank goodness. However, when the spawn reached 3 years of age, Mrs. Carlson was walking past him as he played with some knickknacks from the living room when he suddenly let go with a loud shriek saying, "You stepped on Beatrice!" So Mrs. Carlson put down the laundry she'd been carrying and asked, "Who?" To which he responded that Beatrice was his friend who told him what to do. Mrs. Carlson then told her son to ask Beatrice who she was, and after a pause he replied that Beatrice had told him to tell her that she's a witch. So the mom took away the items the boy was playing with and almost sent him into hysterics in the process. She tossed him into a basket in her bedroom closet, somewhere the boy was forbidden to go without her permission, and didn't really think about it until later that night when she was in bed by herself and saw a large black form in the room with her. She described the entity as being, blacker than the blackest night, moving slowly around the room, freezing her with fright. I swear I'm not a poet. Before the black mask went away, it transmuted into a globe of synthetic light about the size of a basketball, while producing a deafening roar, which she compared to a blasted furnace. This went on for many nights until the Warrens were called in, and like many other times I've mentioned today, took a tour of the home, blessed it, and realized the knickknacks were directly tied to the entity. Now, they've never described them in detail, so I don't have any clear photos to discuss today, but I'm assuming they're around the size of action figures if a 3-year-old was able to play with them. In first place, we have Bathsheba's jewelry box. So this is probably the most famous case on today's list. In January of 1971, the Perron family moved into a 14-room farmhouse in Harrisville, Rhode Island, where Carolyn, Roger, and their 5 daughters began to notice strange occurrences almost immediately. So this started with events that most of us probably wouldn't even register. Carolyn would notice that the broom went missing or seemed to move from place to place on its own, and the young girls of the home began to notice spirits around the house. Carolyn then brought it upon herself to research the history of the home and discovered that it had been in the same family for 8 generations, and that many of them had passed under mysterious or horrible circumstances. The most haunting spirit of the home is that of witch Bathsheba Sherman. Being fairly well off, Bathsheba and her husband Judson had a son, Herbert, born when Bathsheba was about 37 years old, and while the couple gave birth to 3 others, they were unable to survive past the age of 7. One of the passings of a neighbor's ward in her care drew public attention during a post-mortem examination, when it was determined that the fatal wound was caused by a large sewing needle that had been impaled at the base of the skull. It's believed Bathsheba took offense to Carolyn moving into what she considered her home and wanted to take back that control. So the most notable incident overall was one afternoon when Carolyn said that she had been lying on the sofa and out of nowhere felt a piercing type of pain in her calf, and then the muscle began to spasm. And upon examination, she noticed a puddle of redness at the point of impact. She checked her bees or anything else that could have caused the puncture in her leg, but found nothing. In her daughter's book, Andrea Perron describes the wound as perfectly circular, as if a large sewing needle had impaled her skin. Now, if I were to summarize the entire hell the Perron family endured for the decade they lived in what they referred to as the Old Arnold Estate, we'd be here for an hour. But during one of the last instances, the Warrens were called in to help the ailing family, and they removed a box from the home after thoroughly blessing it, believing that it was acting as a conduit for Bathsheba's demonic energy to affect the home, this being the jewelry box.
Our first spot is the Anguished Man painting, a painting that's been said to be haunted by the spirit of its former artist. The Anguished Man was painted by, we have no idea, actually. Fittingly for something like this, its true origin is a mystery, but it's been said that it was painted with a mixture of the artist's own blood and paint, which explains that delightful crimson hue. The artist disappeared after painting it, and in 30 years, no one has been able to trace its origin to anyone. The earliest recorded history of the Anguished Man comes from a woman in North England who owned the painting after receiving it as a gift, and understood that there was something deeply wrong with it, but kept it anyway, I guess. After years of having it in her possession, she gave the relic off and passed it on to her grandson, Sean Robinson. Once the painting found its way into Sean's possession, he reported consistent hauntings from it, claiming that at night the painting can be heard screaming, writhing, loud noises, the painting falling off the wall in the middle of the night, and even going so far as to claim that he's seen the canvas itself twisting. Locking the painting in his basement, but feeling a compulsion to keep it locked to study it and possibly keep it safe from the outside world, Sean has recorded several videos of the Anguished Man in action if you feel like you've been getting too much sleep lately. While some skeptics might doubt that the Anguished Man is actually haunted, there is absolutely zero doubt that the painting itself is as fascinating as it is terrifying. Robert the Doll. At first glance already seems a bit unsettling, between his empty smile and the blank expression of the pet sitting on his lap. If only it ended there. Legend has it that this century-old doll is home to a malevolent spirit locked away. It's been said that misfortune comes to those who don't respect him or insult him. Robert's story begins over 100 years ago, and his true origin is somewhat disputed. It's agreed that he was owned by Robert Jean Otto, who received it as a boy, but some people claim that it was a gift from his grandfather, while locals prefer to claim nefariously that the doll was given to Robert by a servant of the house who hexed it out of resentment. Whatever the case, Robert brought trouble with him. The real Robert, or Gene as he went by, would refer to the doll as if it was a living entity, claiming that it had a will of its own. When things around the house would break, like the rest of Gene's toys being destroyed, he'd claim that Robert had done it. The family would find Gene in the middle of the night, wailing, surrounded by overturned furniture, claiming once again that Robert had done it. People would claim to see Robert out of the windows, appearing and disappearing at seemingly random times of day. While Gene no longer owns Robert, of course, Robert lives in the East Martello Museum in Florida, where it's said that even locked up he still causes havoc, causing electronics to malfunction and go haywire. Employees have reported sleepless nights, strange noises, streaks of bad luck after spending time around Robert. The museum claims too Robert gets 1 to 3 letters a day from people asking for forgiveness or asking him to place a curse on others. If you're ever in the area and you feel like checking in, just make sure you're respectful about it, okay? You never know.
In third place, we have a shadow doll. Among one of the first haunted items visible to those who visit the Warren Occult Museum is a shadow doll, which boasts bird feathers and a genuine human tooth, and she's just overall terrifying to look at. I'm calling it now, she better join that TV universe one day. For reference, a shadow doll is a statue or deity of sorts that is made specifically for harm to be used at the center of curses. I happen to know the steps for the most common curse, and while I'll leave out a step for safety, I promise I'll elaborate. Now, the caster would first need to take a picture of the doll, write a curse on the back of the photo, and then send it to whoever the curse is aimed for. You know, hopefully you've got their mailing address. The person who receives the picture with the curse will sadly invite that curse into their lives. Oh, almost forgot. The doll is also going to appear in that person's dreams, so enjoy your nightmares, folks. While not too much is known about the origins of this specific doll, it was initially purchased in a secondhand store under the assumption that it was simply, an antique. I've got a couple of old dolls myself, and I'm shuddering to think about what they would do if activated by any kind of curse. Some of them talk enough already. In second place, we have Black Magic Math, which is a concept in theosophy, mysticism, and the paranormal, of a materialized thought form, typically in human form such as an imaginary friend or being that is created through spiritual practice and intense concentration. In simpler English, the masks act as a representation of the practice, which is a form of mysticism that involves creating sentient and autonomous beings separate from oneself. The concept of tulpas and their creation, including the word tulpa, come from a closed Tibetan Buddhist practice, with tulpa being a Tibetan word for a creature of the mind. Tulpas did not become part of Western paranormal lore until around the 1970s, and those who practice have been cited as wearing masks similar to Halloween ones in order to take on the appearance of whatever the mask looks like. If anyone is curious about modern practices and appropriations of tulpamancers, the interweb origins can be traced back to 4chan message boards in 2009, and I'm not going to elaborate on just how awful that sentence was to utter. Oh, it gets worse. The communities gained popularity when adult fans of My Little Pony started discussing tulpas of characters from the Friendship is Magic television series. The fans attempted to use meditation and lucid dreaming techniques to create imaginary friends. Well, I think that about sums that up, don't you? In first place, we have the Black Lace Veil. So after one of their many public lectures, Ed was conversing with a couple that had been in the audience, where the boy introduced himself as Alan and explained that he'd brought his girlfriend Lonnie to the lecture because he suspected that she'd been overtaken by some occult influence. He explained that when his girlfriend became angry, her features would change into something resembling a wolf, and then the voice of a different person would speak from inside her. When Lorraine walked over to join the group, Lonnie experienced an episode of instantaneous possession and lurched out in an attempt to attack Lorraine. This incident terrified everyone in the vicinity, with the Warrens ending the audience chat session immediately, before Ed escorted the couple to an offstage room while Lorraine stayed outside. In the backstage room, the girl was fully under possession, breathing heavily, and her facial features had transformed into the wolf-like appearance the boy had talked about. After about 10 minutes, the possession passed, and Lonnie was lucid enough to explain, dealing with memory loss, along with losing hours and days of her life over the last 3 months, which is a symptom common in possession. She went on to share that originally her now boyfriend, Alan, had refused all of her advances and bribery attempts at becoming hers, and she had resorted to visiting a store prominent in selling tools to help with witchcraft, purchasing there a book on the black arts, and later that night performing a ritual for acquiring lovers. This ritual involved, you guessed it, the black lace veil, on top of which she placed a crown of goat horns before renouncing God in her baptism, along with swearing allegiance to Satan, finishing the ritual by washing down the vow with a cup of animal scarlet elixir. About a month after Lonnie performed the ritual, Alan began paying her the attention she craved, making her entitled world perfect. What she hadn't counted on, however, was that she was now in debt to the demonic, having given them permission to enter her life. Ed knew immediately that Lonnie would have to undergo an exorcism as soon as possible, and made contact with a priest the next morning, who was able to come assist with the procedure. Upon arrival, the priest insisted on testing the spirit, so he instructed Lonnie to close her eyes and slowly count to 20, while his assistant stood behind her and placed a cross around 6 inches behind her head. The entity possessing the girl suddenly went wild, screaming, "Take it away! It burns! Take it away!" During the exorcism, it kept screaming, "She's mine! She's mine! Her soul is mine!" in reference to Lonnie. It was eventually separated from Lonnie, but just before it departed, the thing vowed it would return to another. The Warrens brought the black lace veil, goat horns, cup, and the conjuring book home with them so she would be safe from repossession, but the tale of the veil doesn't end here. Months later, when Ed was in a meeting with a lady who was manifesting different personalities, some male, some female, and some that couldn't even be called human, but all making extremely threatening statements, her eyes began to wander, and when they landed on the black veil, she jumped up, grabbed the veil, and clutched it to her chest. Her features immediately began to transform into those of a wild, sneering creature, distinct from the otherwise attractive girl. Ed drew 2 vials of water to himself, one unblessed, the other blessed by an exorcist, and moved away from what was no longer this woman, but an inhuman spirit, a lesser devil of hell. Horrid moaning and various animal sounds came from the girl as Ed blessed her, banishing the demon away for now a second and final time. And that brings us to the end of our list, and I'm glad all of those items are still kicking around the Warren Museum for safety and not out in the open.
Coming at number 5, we've got the satanic idol. Now, Satan is usually quite a controversial figure. In the past, any mention of the name would have been associated with something terrible, especially as satanic panic swept the nation. Why won't anyone think of the children, right? We love to assign weird moral values to stuff to ensure our political weight can be thrown around, but I'm getting off topic. These days, the jury is out on Satan. Many folks love the guy and worship him as ardently as anyone else would worship their deities. Some say he's a more forgiving figure than plenty of other gods and demigods. However, this idol doesn't seem to be associated with that end of the satanic spectrum. This one comes from the bowels of hell and brings with it misfortune and terror, or so they say. Let's take a look at this interesting oddity. With a misshapen horned head, piercing blue eyes, and a strange, unnaturally slim body, this doesn't necessarily look like the powerful demon most folks would assume is Satan. Artists can take liberties with the things they create, so don't write it off simply based on its looks. Apparently, a young hunter had been scavenging through the woods in Connecticut when he stumbled upon this cursed idol. He didn't really know what to do with it, but he took it along just as well. Soon after coming into possession of this horned artifact, he ran into an old man in dark robes, one telling tales of doom and horror. This, of course, spooked the hunter, who discussed this interaction with his friends. Eventually, after some sleepless nights and anxiety, he was put in contact with the Warrens, who came by to evaluate the idol. They deemed it haunted indeed and took it off the poor guy's hands. I'm sure he was very glad to be free of it. Ed and Lorraine strapped the devil thing in and brought it back to their museum, where it still remains. So if you ever get a hankering for some devil worship, or really want to look into some Gollum-esque blue eyes, you know where to go. Just be careful. That cloaked man in the woods is said to have been a worshipper of Satan, using the idol in dark and terrible rituals. I'm sure it's safe in the museum, but who knows? Coming in number 4, we've got the toy monkey. What is it about old school toys that makes them so creepy? Like, at some point in history, every single toy maker decided it was time to stop making them look that way and move on to much cuter, cuddlier, cooler, and overall less frightening things. Maybe tastes changed, or folks just collectively woke up to the fact that they were letting their kids play with nightmare objects, but regardless of the reason, I'm glad we've left these designs in the past. Dredging up these figures makes for some good spooky times though, right? Take this toy monkey for example. Would you buy your kids something like this these days? I'd wager no, and for good reason. Not only is it unsettling to look at, plenty of similar monkeys have been featured in the spookiest of scenes across Hollywood, but there's a lot of dark energy imbued in this particular monkey. The one at the Warrens Museum is said to carry a terrible curse. Hell, it was even featured in Annabelle Comes Home. So what does a little monkey have to do to earn such a reputation? Well, this one seems to stalk people, torment them, and then kill them. Oh no. Imagine this thing suddenly appearing in your life one day, then as time went on it started popping up in places you know you didn't leave it. Little monkey cymbals might be heard crashing in the middle of the night, and disembodied shuffling can keep you from sleeping. All that's creepy, but it's still just a toy, right? Hold up. Did its eyes just glow? That is some monkey business I want no part of. But hey, at least this one in particular is locked away and not to be recirculated into the general population of antique monkey toys. Well, for now anyway.
Number 3, the Delphi Sapphire. The Delphi Sapphire is a seemingly beautiful gem that carries with it a dark legacy. It's also known as the Gem of Sorrow, named for the misfortune it brings upon all those who've owned it. Its first owner was a British cavalryman named Colonel Ferris, who stole the gem from a sacred temple in India in the 18th century. Soon after returning to England, he was plagued with financial destitution, bringing his family to the brink of collapse. Shortly after this, his family all started to develop debilitating diseases. Ferris suspected that the gem was responsible for these wrongdoings, and attempted to pass it off to a family friend who fell gravely ill immediately after taking it in. Shortly after Ferris's friend passed, the gem was bought by Edward Heron Allen, a scientist who similarly experienced his life falling apart after acquiring the gem. In a desperate attempt to free himself of the curse, Edward threw the gem into Regent's Canal, thinking that he'd freed himself of the accursed stone. Sadly, much like the one true ring, this gem wasn't going to stay at the bottom of a river. It was fished out of the canal and quickly sold to a local jeweler, who recognized the stone as one he had mounted onto a ring for a client, one Edward Heron Allen. Thinking he was doing Edward a favor, the jeweler crafted a new ring and returned it to Edward. Isn't that nice? From there on, Edward swiftly tried to rid himself of it again, this time giving it off to a singer, who after a brief ownership, lost her voice entirely and never sang again. With the ring once again in his possession, Edward decided to end the vicious cycle of re-gifting and lock the sapphire away. He locked it in 7 stacked boxes surrounded by good luck charms and gave it to his bank to store in their vault until his passing, never to be opened, never to be sold. Heron even advised the bank that after his passing, it should be kept for another 33 years, just in case there was any residual curse smell in the box, I guess. Anyway, eventually, the sapphire found its way to a museum, as these things always do, who upon opening the 7 boxes found inside a letter reading, "This sapphire is accursed, and stained with the blood and dishonor of everyone who has ever owned it. Whoever opens this box, do with it what you wish. My advice, however, is to throw it into the sea." Number 2. James Dean's car. Absolutely nothing is cooler than driving a souped-up Porsche, and in the 1950s, there was no one cooler than James Dean. Aside from being the cultural face of 1950s teenage delusionment and an icon for outcasts of his day, James Dean had a passion for cars and racing, and had a collection of impeccable Porsches, although the last one he would ever own was a Porsche Spyder 550. It was actually commissioned for Dean, and was one of the first makes of that car produced. A souped-up Porsche capable of race speeds, it seemed like the perfect car for a hot-headed rebel. But from the moment he got it, people were wary. A friend of Dean's, actor Alec Guinness, wrote in his diary after meeting James with the car that the sports car looked sinister to me. Exhausted, hungry. I found myself saying in a voice I could hardly recognize, "Please never get in that car. You will be found dead." Normally any friend telling you outright not to get into a car would be worth paying attention to, but I feel like special triple warning should be heeded if it was Obi-Wan Kenobi telling me not to do it. Sure enough, Dean ignored, went ahead and raced the car anyway, leading to a tragic car accident that would claim the actor's life. Shortly thereafter, the Spyder was chopped for parts, where its engine was bought by Dr. William Esquerich and installed in his own car. The suspension and transmission of the Spyder was given to Esquerich's colleague and fellow doctor and racing enthusiast, Troy McHenry. In a race in 1956, both doctors driving cars with the Porsche's old parts both crashed, leading to the death of McHenry and injuring Esquerich. Somehow, not learning any lessons, the self-proclaimed king of customs, George Barris, purchased the mangled wreck of the 550, hoping to rebuild it as a tourist attraction, where it was sold to the National Safety Council as a harrowing display of road safety. In 1959, while in storage, the car spontaneously caught flame. The tires were sold to a private buyer who had them burst on the road, causing them to careen off. And finally, in 1960, while in transit from Miami, the car disappeared entirely. The whereabouts of the car and its pieces are currently unknown, with the only confirmed part left being a transaxle that was found in Massachusetts. And finally, at our number 1 spot, the Devil's Rocking Chair. When we think of a devil sitting atop a throne, our mind isn't likely to conjure up the image of a rocking chair. That's more for kindly old grandparents. But for the Glatzel family, it was all too real. Seemingly an unassuming piece of leisure furniture, this twisted piece of haunted mahogany became the focus of one of America's most notorious exorcisms. In the early 1980s, the young son of the Glatzel family, David Glatzel, claimed that he was being plagued by nightmares of a creature with jagged teeth, twisted horns, and hooves. And the family was worried, as the boy wasn't really the kind to make things up. The boy insisted that he would see this beast sitting in the chair, rocking, watching him, laughing, threatening to steal his soul away. You know, regular old imaginary friend stuff. The visions persisted and even manifested physically, with David waking up in the middle of the night with scratches, bruises, and cuts, as well as red marks around his neck, as if something had been grabbing his throat. He would convulse during the night, and a family member would watch him sleep, as he would have seizures repeatedly. David started to hiss and growl at his family, and even was reported to have spoken tongues, quoting from the Bible. Eventually it became too much for the family to bear, and professional help was brought in from, who else? Ed and Lorraine Warren, who performed multiple exorcisms, and brought in a series of priests to try and quell the spirits inside the house. Lorraine asserts that she saw the chair levitate in her time there. After a final exorcism, it's reported that the demon left young David, but found its way into his sister's fiancé, one Arn Johnson. She reported the same growls, hissing, as well as slipping into periodic trances he couldn't be shook from. Tragically, Arn was involved in a conflict that led to the death of his landlord, and when he stood trial for it, insisted that he hadn't acted on it, but rather it was the demon possessing him that made him do it. He was locked away. After these dark events, the chair was kept away in storage, for fear that its evils might seep into the rest of the world. It resides now in the Haunted Museum, owned by Zach Baggins himself, one of the world's foremost experts on the paranormal and a sort of modern successor to the Warrens, who's indisputably the wisest man to be owning something like this. Let's just hope he's not looking to get comfortable in it anytime soon. Upon entering the Warrens Museum, one of the first things you'll see is this frightening little shadow doll, made of bird feathers and real human teeth. The Warrens' son-in-law and current proprietor of the museum, Tony Spera, offers a bit of insight on the doll, saying it was originally acquired at an antique shop, where it was being sold, and the owners of the shop, being none the wiser of the doll's evil, had it for sale. That's totally on the antique shop owners though. You come into possession of a doll made of bird feathers and human teeth, your first instinct should be to bury it with some rosaries, not stick a price tag on it, but I digress. The doll's curse works by taking a photograph of the doll, and when it develops, writing the curse you'd like to inflict and sending it to your victim. The person who then opens the envelope and sees the doll in the photograph will invite the curse into your home. The real question I have about the shadow doll is, do you think it is jealous that it's not the most famous haunted doll in the Warrens collection? I know I'd probably have a hard time sitting next to Annabelle all day while everyone comes to gawk at my movie star sister. And no wonder the doll is cursing people. If you're having fun, drop a subscribe and catch new scary videos every single day. Number 4. The Brick from Borley Rectory. A brick? Okay, you're running out of ideas and it's only number 4. Well, bear with me, okay? It's not just the brick, it's the story behind the brick. And besides, a brick is actually pretty scary on its own. It doesn't even need to be haunted. Just imagine it being thrown into a window. Bam, very scary. Anyway, this particular cursed brick comes to us from Borley Rectory, one of the most haunted houses in the United Kingdom, and I gotta say, possibly one of the worst named buildings in the country. Borley Rectory sounds like a horrible medical infection. Borley Rectory could be its own video based on all the alleged hauntings and stories that have taken place in its hallowed walls. Since the 18th century, it's been home to all sorts of reported hauntings. It checks off all the usual requirements for a haunted domicile. To name a few: unexplained footsteps, ghostly apparitions, bells ringing without reason, whispers of a headless monk that would wander the halls, horse-drawn carriages being commandeered by a headless horseman, seeing shadows, and one ghastly nun who just maybe served as the inspiration for the nun from the film The Nun. There is a lot going on at this haunted building. So, naturally, it's a great spot for two famed demonologists, and sometime in the 1970s, Ed and Lorraine Warren ventured out to the UK to investigate the Borley Rectory and see if maybe they could put a plug in some of this. Upon entering, Lorraine declared almost immediately that she could feel the presence of a nun's spirit. So the pair took some photographs, and after developing the photographs, lo and behold was the ghostly apparition of a nun in the corner. Now obviously the story of the film is much different, and in the film The Nun, the Warrens only really appear for a Thanos-style cameo at the end, but you never know, this could very well have been the inspiration for that character. The brick serves as a souvenir and a remainder of one more haunting in their storied logbook.
Coming in number 3, we've got the Shadow Doll. Now, we've all got a particular cursed doll in mind when it comes to the Warrens, and now she's the star of a major motion picture franchise, so it seems that she's always going to come in first. But there is another doll at the museum that should elicit at least the same amount of fear. That's right, I'm talking about the Shadow Doll. This thing is downright butt ugly. Like, Annabelle as an OG Raggedy Annie is kinda creepy, and they had to make sure they punched up the creepiness with some porcelain features and unnerving eyes for the movie. But if they made a movie featuring the Shadow Doll as is, I think they might actually have to make it less creepy. For real. I don't know if big movie theater chains would allow something like this on their screens. Feels like something out of a snuff film, maybe a low-budget exploitation flick. Nobody's looking at this and saying, oh yeah, I want to watch a whole movie based on this thing. Worse yet, the Shadow Doll seems to carry a much more terrible curse than most. Plenty of cursed dolls require you to be in the same room as them in order for the worst of the effects to hit you, but the Shadow Doll just needs you to view a picture of it to generate risk. Just Looking at it means there's a chance it'll visit you in your dreams and kill you there, Freddy Krueger style. And based on looks, I don't think it would make it fun like Freddy does. It would just be brutal and upsetting. Goodness gracious. Coming in number 2, we've got the Pearls of Death. These are known for their outrageously dangerous powers. They might just look like a nice set of pearls waiting to be adorned by the fanciest of folk, but be warned, the glamour is not worth the price. And I'm not talking about how much you pay for them. No, it is not money that these pearls want, it is your life. Owners of this particular string of aquatic orbs have complained time and time again of the necklace constricting around their throat and choking them. According to the first woman to adorn herself with this luxurious item, she felt as if she was being strangled as soon as she put them on. She attempted to take them off, but was unsuccessful. Panicked, she rushed out to request help, and it took multiple people yanking on the string to finally set her free. Since then, people have been very reluctant to wear these pearls. Some believe that a Satanist or black magic worshipper cursed the necklace before it was given to the unfortunate woman, kind of like the opposite of a holy person blessing an object. How fun. I wonder if we got a priest in there, whether they could cancel out the curse. I suppose not too many people are willing to test whether or not the pearls are still strangling. And finally, at number 1, we've got Annabelle, the Warren Museum tenant who needs no introduction, the mistress of the glass case, the shadow clawer of college boyfriends, the mega million movie star herself, Annabelle. What a classic cursed doll. Honestly, I'm sure the museum could liquidate most of their other objects and still have a similar crowd come by if they just kept Annabelle. Legendary. She looks a little different in real life than in the movies, although I'm sure this is true of any movie star. We've already discussed her Raggedy Annie appearance, especially compared to the more porcelain figure in the flicks. However, this doll makes up for a lack of spooky looks with a plethora of terrifying tales. After being gifted to a nursing student, Annabelle started acting strange. She'd move around the house on her own and leave little notes to the girls living there. Eventually, she would attack and strangle the boyfriend of one of the students, leaving them desperate for help. The Warrens soon arrived and whisked the doll away. However, they seemed to know just how wretched and terrible she could be, and as such, they locked Annabelle away in a holy box. This seems to keep her at bay, but who knows? Someday she could break free once again.